Hello and welcome to Things You Don't Know. I'm Dr. Weaver. Today's episode is about Memorial Day, a day many Americans associate with the beginning of summer, cookouts, travel, sales, family gatherings, and a long weekend. But underneath all of that is something much older, much deeper, and much more serious. Memorial Day is not simply a day off. It is not Veterans Day. It is not Armed Forces Day. It's not just a patriotic decoration on the calendar. No, Memorial Day is a day set aside to remember the men and women who died while serving in the armed forces of the United States. It's a day about graves. It's a day about names. It's a day about families who received telegrams, folded flags, and silence where a familiar voice used to be. It is a day about the cost of the nation. If we are honest, Memorial Day also asks an uncomfortable question. How do we remember well? Or do we merely pause briefly while returning to convenience? Today, we'll look at when Memorial Day was established, why it came into being, how Americans have paid tribute in the past, whether other countries have their own versions of Memorial Day, and near the end, we'll touch briefly on the controversy over Donald Trump and the reported remarks about fallen American soldiers. Let's begin where Memorial Day itself begins, in the aftermath of the Civil War. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history. It tore communities apart, divided families, and left fields, churches, towns, and cemeteries filled with the dead. By the time the fighting ended in 1865, the country had not only a political crisis and a constitutional crisis, but also a mourning crisis. How does a nation bury so many? How does a nation remember so many? And how does a nation, after killing so many of its own sons, decide what those deaths mean? In the years immediately after the war, many communities began decorating the graves of fallen soldiers. Flowers were placed on graves, flags appeared, local ceremonies were held. Churches, veterans groups, women's organizations, and families participated. Several towns claim to have started the tradition. Waterloo, New York, was later officially recognized by the federal government as the birthplace of Memorial Day, though historians note that many local observances appeared in different places around the same time. That makes sense. No single town owned grief. The grief was national. The first national version of what was then called Decoration Day came in 1868. General Logan, leader of the Grand Army of the Republic, an organization of Union veterans, issued an order calling for May 30th, 1868, to be set aside for decorating the graves of those who had died in the Civil War. The original idea was simple and powerful. Go to the graves of the dead and decorate them with flowers. Not speeches first, not politics first, not celebration first. Flowers first. Yeah. The name Decoration Day tells us what mattered. The act of decorating graves was not a minor ritual. It was the ritual. It said, "You are not forgotten. Your grave will not stand bare. Your name will not vanish." On that first National Decoration Day in 1868, a major ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. General James Garfield, who would later become president, spoke there. Thousands of participants helped decorate the graves of the Civil War dead. That image, ordinary citizens walking among military graves, placing flowers one by one, captures the heart of the day better than almost anything else. Memorial Day was not born as a shopping weekend. It was born as a national act of mourning. For many decades, Memorial Day was observed on May the 30th. There are different explanations for why that date was chosen, but one common explanation is practical and symbolic. Flowers would be blooming across much of the country. In 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act. That law moved several holidays to Mondays to create long weekends for federal employees. The change took effect in 1971, and Memorial Day became a federal holiday observed on the last Monday in May. That change made travel easier. It gave families time together. It helped create what we now call Memorial Day weekend. But it also created tension. A 3-day weekend can be useful. Families need rest. Communities need gathering. There's nothing wrong with a picnic or a baseball game or a trip to see relatives. But the danger is that the weekend can swallow the memorial. Memorial Day can become the unofficial start of summer, while the reason for the day fades into the background. That is why some veterans organizations and families of the fallen have long argued that Memorial Day should not become merely a leisure weekend. The day has room for family, but it must begin with memory. So, how have Americans paid tribute? One of the most solemn national traditions takes place at Arlington National Cemetery, especially at the tomb of the unknown soldier. There, a wreath is laid in honor of the unidentified and unknown and known alike. Those whose names are recorded and those whose names were lost to war. The tomb of the unknown soldier is powerful because it represents a painful truth. Sometimes the country cannot even return a name to a family. Sometimes a sacrifice is known, but the identity is not. At Arlington, the rows of white headstones have become one of the most recognizable images of American military memory. But Arlington is not the only place where the meaning of Memorial Day lives. Across the country, communities hold ceremonies in town squares, at courthouse lawns, at local cemeteries, at veterans' memorials, and in small churches where the names of the dead may still be remembered by relatives sitting in the pews. There's also the tradition of flags being placed on graves. Anyone who has seen a cemetery filled with small American flags understands the emotional force of repetition. One flag is touching, Thousands of flags become overwhelming. Each one says, a person was here. A life was interrupted. A family paid a price. Another tribute is the playing of taps. Its notes are simple, but they have become part of the national and emotional language of American mourning. When taps is played over a military grave, it says what ordinary language often just really cannot. Then there is a national moment of remembrance. In 2000, Congress established a national moment at 3 p.m. local time on Memorial Day, asking Americans to pause for 1 minute, in memory of those who died in service. That's a small act, but a meaningful one. At 3 p.m., wherever a person is, at a ball game, in a backyard, on the road, at work, at home, the country asks for 1 minute. 1 minute of silence in a noisy nation. 1 minute to remember that freedom, policy, history, and national identity are not abstractions to those who died in uniform. Another important tradition is the wearing of red poppies. The poppy became associated with remembrance after World War I, especially through the poem In Flanders Fields, written by the Canadian physician John McCrae. In the United States, Moina Michael helped promote the poppy as a symbol of remembrance and support for veterans. The poppy reminds us that war changes landscapes. In the fields of Europe after World War I, poppies grew where soldiers had died. The flower became a symbol of life growing out of devastation, fragile, red, and unforgettable. And then there are the large public tributes. For years, Rolling Thunder brought motorcycles into Washington, D.C. around Memorial Day weekend to call attention to prisoners of war and those missing in action. The sound of thousands of motorcycles became its own kind of public memorial, loud, impossible to ignore, and connected to the promise that the missing should not be forgotten. Memorial Day tributes vary in style. Some are silent, some are ceremonial, some are musical, some are deeply local, some are national. The best ones share one purpose: to return attention to the dead. Now, it is important to distinguish Memorial Day from Veterans Day. Now, Veterans Day is observed in November, and it honors all who served in the U.S. Armed Forces. Memorial Day specifically honors those who died in service. That distinction matters. On Veterans Day, we may say, "Thank you for your service" to a living veteran. On Memorial Day, the central figures cannot hear our thanks. So instead, we speak to memory, we speak to families, we speak to the future. Memorial Day says, let the next generation know what was given before they arrived. So do other countries have their own Memorial Days? Yes, a lot of them do. Many may not use the same name, and they may not fall on the same date, but nations around the world have days of remembrance for those who died in war or military service. And there is a number of them. Different countries remember differently, because different countries carry different histories. Some remember victory, some remember invasion, some remember occupation, some remember liberation, some remember soldiers, some remember civilians, some remember both. The human need is the same. The dead must be named. The cost must be faced. The living must not pretend that peace is free. Now let us turn to a modern political controversy, because Memorial Day is also a test of public language. Donald Trump, in a reported statement which has been verified numerous times, about soldiers buried from D-Day being losers. He made that comment. It is important to be kind of precise here. The controversy does not appear to have been specifically just about D-Day soldiers buried at Normandy. It may be about the major incident which involved Trump canceling the 2018 visit to the Anse-Marne American Cemetery in France, where American World War I dead are buried, including those connected to the Battle of Belleau Wood. In 2020, The Atlantic reported that Trump referred to American war dead as losers and suckers. Trump denied the report. Later, former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly publicly supported the broader claim that Trump had used such language about fallen service members, while some other former officials disputed or complicated parts of the story. So, in a responsible discussion, we should say this carefully. Trump has denied saying it. The allegation was reported by major news organizations and supported by John Kelly, and the specific cemetery controversy most often discussed was tied to World War I dead in France, not just the D-Day dead at Normandy. And this by the man who got out of serving because of a bone spur that doesn't seem to have impeded him in any way since that time. So the reason the controversial matters on Memorial Day is not merely political. It matters because language about the fallen is never just language. To call the dead losers, if said, would strike at the core meaning of Memorial Day. It would invert the moral logic of the holiday. Memorial Day says that those who died in service are not losers, they are not suckers. They are human beings whose lives were placed in the machinery of history, policy, duty, fear, courage, and national decision. That does not mean every war was wise, nor are necessarily any war wise. It does not mean every battle was necessary. It does not mean political leaders should be excused from criticism. In fact, respecting the fallen may require us to ask hard questions about the wars in which they were sent to fight. But the individual dead are not to be mocked. They are not props. They are not punchlines. They are not abstractions. At Normandy American Cemetery in France, more than 9,000 American military dead are buried, most of them connected to the D-Day landings and the operations that follow. If you stand there above Omaha Beach, you do not see losers. You see the visible cost of decisions made by nations, commanders, and perhaps history itself. You see youth that did not return home. And that is why Memorial Day must remain larger than party politics. It must be serious enough to criticize leaders when necessary, but sacred enough not to reduce the dead to campaign material. There is another question Memorial Day asks us. What exactly are we remembering? Are we remembering only sacrifice? Are we remembering courage? Are we remembering the horror of war? Are we remembering national unity? Are we remembering grief? The answer is yes, all of these. But we should also remember responsibility. A nation that honors its war dead should be careful about not creating more of them. Memorial Day should not make war seem beautiful. It should make sacrifice visible. It should make policy serious. It should make citizens more thoughtful. If we decorate graves while speaking casually about war, we've missed the point. If we praise the fallen but ignore wounded veterans, grieving families, and those still missing, we have missed the point. If we treat Memorial Days as only nostalgia, we have missed the point. The day should humble us. The Civil War dead remind us what happens when a nation fails to resolve its deepest moral contradictions peacefully. The World War I dead remind us how alliances, nationalism, and miscalculation can devour a generation. The World War II dead remind us that tyranny and authoritarianism sometimes must be resisted at the most terrible cost. The Korean War dead remind us of conflicts sometimes called forgotten, though they were never forgotten by the families who lost someone. The Vietnam War, the Vietnam dead, remind us that patriotism and protest can exist in the same nation, and that the cost of war can divide a people for decades and decades. The dead of Iraq and Afghanistan remind us that modern wars do not end neatly when speeches say they do. Each war leaves behind cemeteries. Each cemetery leaves behind questions. So, how should we observe Memorial Day? Begin pretty simply. Visit a cemetery, read a name aloud, watch a local ceremony, pause at 3 p.m., ask an older relative who they remember. Teach children the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Look up the story of someone from your town who died in service. Fly the flag properly. Listen to taps without rushing past us. And perhaps most importantly, resist the temptation to make the day only comfortable. There is room for family and food. There's room for laughter. The dead do not die, so the living can never smile again. But remembrance should come first. Before the grill is lit, before the sale is advertised, before the beach towel is unfolded, before the first pitch is thrown, remember. Because Memorial Day is not about glorifying death. It's about refusing to let death in service become invisible. At its best, Memorial Day does not tell us that America has always been right. It tells us that Americans have died. That's a different statement, a more serious statement, a more honest statement. The dead came from all walks of life. Some volunteered, some were drafted, some were young enough to still be uncertain who they were going to become. They had favorite songs, they had arguments at homes, they had people who annoyed them, they had foods they loved, they had plans. And then history took them. Memorial Day asks us to give them back their humanity. Not just a number, not just a uniform, not just a flag, a person. So this Memorial Day, enjoy the company of those you love, rest if you can, gather if you can, be grateful if you can. But somewhere in the day, make room for silence, make room for a name, make room for the uncomfortable truth that freedoms and failures of a nation are both carried by real people. Decoration Day began with flowers on graves. Maybe that is still the best image we have. A flower is temporary, memory must be renewed. A grave is silent, the living must speak. I'm Dr. Weaver, and this has been Things You Don't Know. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface, and on Memorial Day, take at least one quiet minute to remember those who never came home. Goodbye until next time.